On the 3rd of June 2026, a laboratory in Ames, Iowa, confirmed something that officially had not existed in the United States since before the moon landing. The sample had come from a ranch in Zavala County, Texas, southwest of San Antonio, down in the brush country not far from the Mexican border. It came from a calf that was 3 weeks old. Somebody had noticed a problem at the animal's navel, where the umbilical cord had been. Not a large wound, the kind of small, ordinary, healing up thing that exists on a working ranch every single day of the year. There was something living in it. The sample went to the National Veterinary Services Laboratory, which is where the country sends things it needs to be absolutely certain about. And the answer came back as the one word the American cattle industry has spent 6 decades not wanting to hear: screwworm. 2 days later, a second case. Another calf, about a month old, on ground roughly 5.5 miles from the first. 3 days after that, a dog in Lee County, New Mexico. By the 9th of June, there were 6 confirmed animals. By the middle of July, there were 42, across 2 states, and 18 of those were sheep and goats. Now, the reason that matters, the reason a small number of infected farm animals became national news and triggered a state disaster declaration and a federal response, is not the 42 animals. It is what the United States did between 1950 and 1966 to make sure this fly was never in this country again. Because that effort was, without exaggeration, one of the strangest and most brilliant things this country has ever done. It involved a letter that was never delivered, a veterinarian on a Caribbean island, an X-ray machine, and eventually airplanes dropping millions of flies out of the sky every week for years. It worked, completely. And it is the only reason the last 3 generations of Americans have never had to think about this animal at all. So let us start with what the fly actually is, because almost nothing about it works the way you would assume. Its name is Cochleomia hominivirax. That second word is Latin, and it translates roughly as man-eater. Entomologists do not usually name things that way. They did with this one. It is a blowfly. If you have ever seen a dead animal on the roadside covered in maggots, you have seen blowflies doing their job, and their job is genuinely useful. Blowflies find dead things and break them down. They are part of how the world cleans itself up. Nearly every fly in that family eats tissue that is already dead. The screwworm does not wait. A female screwworm fly seeks out a living animal with a wound. Not a large wound. It does not need one. A tick bite will do, a scratch from barbed wire, a cut from a thorn. The soft tissue around the eyes or the nose or the mouth, the navel of a newborn calf still healing, hours old. She lays her eggs directly onto the edge of that wound. She can lay a couple of hundred at a time. They hatch in about 12 hours, and then the larvae do the thing that separates this animal from every other fly on the continent. They burrow downward into living tissue, and they keep going. They are built for it. The larva has rings of small backward-facing spines along its body, so that as it works deeper, it anchors itself in place. Pulling one out is close to impossible, because the spines grip in the wrong direction. That corkscrew shape is where the name comes from. It screws itself in. The medical term for fly larvae feeding in living tissue is myosis. Most cases of myosis are unpleasant and survivable. This is not that. A screwworm infestation grows. The wound gets bigger rather than smaller, because the larvae are actively enlarging it, and a larger wound draws more flies, which lay more eggs, which produce more larvae. It compounds on itself. An untreated animal can die in about 10 days, and many die of infection and shock along the way. That is the fly. Now here is what it meant for the country. Before 1966, screwworm was simply a fact of life across the American South and Southwest, and it shaped how ranching worked at the level of daily routine. Every wound was a countdown. That is not a metaphor, it is a work schedule. If you branded, castrated, dehorned, or docked an animal, you had opened a door. If a cow gave birth, the calf arrived with a fresh navel and the mother with birth tissue, and both were targets. So ranchers timed those operations around the seasons when the fly was less active, and through the warm months they rode their pastures constantly, looking at every animal, because catching an infestation on day 2 and catching it on day 6 were completely different outcomes. The fly is active in temperatures roughly between 61 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In the deep South and South Texas, that is most of the year. The financial damage in the 1950s was estimated above $200 million a year in losses to American meat and dairy production. Put that in the money of the time. It was one of the heaviest single drags on American livestock in the country. And it was never only livestock. The fly does not care what species you are. Deer were hit. Any warm-blooded animal with a wound was eligible. People occasionally, though rarely, and mostly where injuries went untreated. That was the situation. and the accepted response was the one every farmer everywhere uses. Treat the wound, apply the chemical, kill the larvae in that animal, then do it again tomorrow on a different animal. Forever, nobody thought there was another option, because for an insect that widespread there had never been another option. Then a man had an idea that nobody in the history of pest control had ever had. His name was Edward Knipling, and he was a government entomologist. In the 1930s he was working in the South on this exact problem, and while studying the biology of the fly, he noticed something about how it reproduced. The female screwworm fly mates once in her entire life. She finds a male she mates, she stores what she needs, and from that point on she lays eggs without ever mating again. For most of a century that had been a piece of trivia in a research paper. Knipling looked at it and saw a weapon. Here is the logic, and it is worth taking slowly, because it is the basis of everything that followed, and it is one of the most elegant ideas in the history of applied science. Every method of pest control up to that point tried to kill the pest. Poison it, trap it, burn its habitat. The trouble is that killing works proportionally. Kill half the flies and you have half as many flies, and then they breed back and you do it again next year forever. You can never reach zero because as the population shrinks, finding and killing the survivors gets harder and harder. Knipling's idea inverted that completely. Do not kill the flies. Release more of them. Enormous numbers. But release only males, make sure those males cannot father anything. A wild female finds one of them, mates with him, and because she only mates once, that is the end of her line. She lays her eggs. They do not hatch. She never gets another chance. And here is the beautiful part, the part that makes this the opposite of every other control method. As the wild population shrinks, this technique gets more effective, not less. The ratio keeps improving. If you release the same number of sterile males every week while the wild males dwindle, a wild female becomes more and more likely to meet a sterile one. The last few wild females in an area are almost mathematically guaranteed to mate with a sterile male. Killing gets harder as you approach zero. This gets easier. It closes the door instead of narrowing it. Now, the story of what happened to that idea is the part most people have never heard, and it is a small tragedy sitting in the middle of a triumph. Knipling wrote his idea down and sent it up the chain to his supervisor, a man named Emery Cushing. Cushing never forwarded it. Knipling did not find that out for about 30 years. When he eventually learned what had happened, he also learned that every copy of that letter had been destroyed except one. The idea sat in a drawer. The Second World War came, and Knipling spent it working on insect problems affecting American servicemen, which is a different and urgent job. And the screwworm went on doing exactly what it had always done to American herds. Meanwhile, another scientist was working on the piece Knipling's idea needed. His name was Raymond Bushland, at a federal laboratory in Kerrville, Texas. The theory required sterile male flies, and nobody had a practical way to make those. Bushland worked out how to raise screwworm flies in captivity in large numbers on a specially developed diet, and then how to sterilize them with X-ray radiation at a dose that would leave a male perfectly healthy and perfectly capable of finding and courting a female, but unable to father offspring. That is the hard part, and it is worth pausing on. A sterile male is useless if the radiation leaves him weak or slow or unattractive. He has to compete with wild males on their own terms and win his share of matings. Getting that dose right is the difference between a laboratory curiosity and a technology. Bushland got it right. He and Knipling put their halves together, and the result is now known as the Sterile Insect Technique. Then it had to be tested on something real. In 1951, Bushland ordered a release of sterile flies on Sanibel Island, off the Gulf Coast of Florida. An island, because an island is a controlled space that new flies cannot easily walk into. The results were promising enough that by 1953, the team was cautiously optimistic, and the island trials wrapped up. And then, that same year, a letter arrived at the United States Department of Agriculture from a place none of them had been thinking about. It came from a veterinarian named B.A. Bitter on the island of Curaçao in the Caribbean, about 40 miles north of Venezuela. Curaçao had a screwworm problem that was destroying the island's goats, which mattered enormously there, because those goats were a primary source of meat and milk for the people living on it. The infestation was not limited to livestock. It was hitting animals of every kind and killing them. Bitter was writing to ask whether anybody had any idea what to do. When Knipling went to find Curaçao on a map, he realized what he was looking at. Not a tragedy, a laboratory. An island of about 176 square miles, isolated in open ocean, with a resident screwworm population, a local veterinarian willing to run traps and collect data, and no realistic way for wild flies to walk back in from anywhere else. It was, from a scientific standpoint, the perfect place to find out whether this actually worked outside a controlled trial. Knipling wrote back and told him that field tests were underway, that some had succeeded and some had not, that the method was complicated, and that he thought it was worth trying. Bitter agreed to run the traps. So the USDA began raising screwworm flies by the million, sterilizing the males with X-rays, and dropping them out of aircraft over Curaçao. The newspapers of the day, reaching for a way to describe airplanes releasing millions of insects over an island, called them entomological air raids. It took about 3 months. At the end of it, the team went through the eggs being laid by wild females on that island, and could not find a single viable one. Not a reduced number. None. On the 25th of May, 1955, American newspapers ran the story, and the phrase they landed on was that the atom and romance had beaten the screwworm. The fly was gone from Curaçao. If you want the part where a 60-year success story turns out to have a condition attached that almost nobody noticed, that is exactly where this goes next. Subscribing is how the next one of these finds you when it is ready. Because after Curaçao, this stopped being a science project and became an industrial operation on a scale that is difficult to picture. In 1958, the Florida legislature put up money for a full-scale eradication program, and the federal government matched it. They built an insect production plant, not a laboratory. A factory whose product was flies. At full production, that plant turned out 50 million sterile flies a week. 50 million, every week. Reared, fed, sterilized, packed, loaded onto aircraft, and released over the landscape of the American South. By early 1959, the screwworm had disappeared from Florida and most of the southeast. Some unusually cold winters helped. The cattlemen's associations and the state and federal agencies pushed the campaign forward together. And then the whole operation turned west. Then it was Texas's turn, which was a far larger problem and took years more. And in 1966, the New World screwworm was declared eradicated from the United States of America. An insect that had cost the country hundreds of millions of dollars a year, that had shaped the daily working life of every rancher across a third of the nation, was simply gone. Not reduced. Gone. Knipling and Bushland were eventually awarded the World Food Prize for it, and the technique they invented went on to be used against other pests around the world, including stopping a serious screwworm outbreak in North Africa in 1991. It is one of the great achievements in the history of agriculture, and almost nobody outside entomology and ranching has ever heard of it. But there is a condition attached, and here it is. The program never actually ended. After the United States, the campaign kept pushing south. Mexico. Then Belize. Then down through Central America, country by country, over decades, until in 2006 the last of it was cleared out of Panama. And there they stopped. Because at Panama the American landmass narrows into the Darién Gap, a thin neck of dense jungle between Panama and Colombia. South America still had screwworm and always would. So rather than attempt an entire second continent, they built a wall. Not a physical wall, a biological one. A permanent barrier zone across that narrow strip, into which sterile flies have been released continuously, year after year, ever since. Any wild fly working its way north out of Colombia arrives in a landscape saturated with sterile mates, and its line ends there. That is what has been protecting the United States. Not distance, not the border. A factory that has never been allowed to stop running, and a curtain of sterile flies over a jungle 2,000 miles away. For nearly 20 years it held. In 2023, animal health officials began documenting screwworm moving north again through Central America. In November of 2024, the first case in southern Mexico was officially reported to the USDA in the state of Chiapas. And from there, it worked north through Mexico across the next 18 months. The American response ramped up as it came. In June of 2025, the governor of Texas ordered the state's Parks and Wildlife Department and its Animal Health Commission to create a joint screwworm response team. In August of 2025, the state partnered with the USDA on a $750 million domestic sterile fly production facility at Edinburgh, in the Rio Grande Valley, to supply flies for preventive releases. That same month, the first human case in the country was reported in an international traveler who recovered with no evidence of further spread. In January of 2026, the governor issued a statewide disaster declaration, noting specifically that the fly had not yet been detected in Texas or anywhere in the United States, but that its northward movement was a serious threat to Texas livestock and wildlife. 4 months later, it was here. The calf in Zavala County on the 3rd of June. The second calf 5.5 miles away 2 days later. A dog across the state line in New Mexico on the 8th. Then cases in LaSalle County and in Gillespie County, which is worth noting because Gillespie County is not on the border. It is up in the Texas Hill Country, north of San Antonio, in the middle of the state. By the middle of July, 42 confirmed domestic animal cases across Texas and New Mexico, with sheep and goats making up a large share of them. If you have ever worked with livestock, or grew up around people who did, you have probably heard older relatives describe checking every animal every day in a way that sounded excessive. Put it in the comments. That habit came from somewhere, and this is where it came from. So where does that leave things? There are 3 honest ways to read this, and it is worth being clear about all of them. The first reading is genuinely optimistic, and it is not empty reassurance. This is one of the only invasive species problems in the world where the answer is already known. Nobody has to invent anything. The technique works. It has worked repeatedly across multiple continents for 70 years. The biology of the fly has not changed, and the female still mates only once. The United States has beaten this exact animal before, from a far worse starting position, using 1950s technology. There is a playbook, and it is a proven one. The second reading is the constraint, and it is a real one. The playbook requires flies, enormous numbers, sustained, week after week, released over exactly the right ground. And the current bottleneck in this response is production capacity. The available supply of sterile flies has been described as insufficient for an outbreak of this size and spread. Fly factories are not quick to build. That $750 million facility in Edinburgh exists because everyone involved understood that the barrier in Panama alone would not be enough if the fly ever got past it, and the fly got past it. The third reading is about the difference between 1966 and now, and it cuts both ways. In the fly's favor, there is far more livestock in the United States today, moving far more often and far further. Texas alone held 12.1 million head of cattle as of January of this year, the largest inventory in the country. More animals, more movement, more wounds, more opportunities. In America's favor, detection is vastly better than it was. The original campaign spent years simply finding out where the fly was. Now a rancher notices a wound at a navel, a veterinarian takes a sample, a federal laboratory confirms it within days, and a quarantine zone goes up around it. And that is exactly what happened in Zavala County. Detection to confirmation to response, fast. That part of the system worked. There is one more thing though, and it is the piece that makes this harder than the numbers suggest. Sterile flies work everywhere. Inspection does not. The reason the response depends so heavily on ranchers checking animals daily is that livestock can be checked. Someone owns them, someone rides through them, someone notices the wound. That is the early warning system, and it is built almost entirely on private landowners doing careful work on their own animals. Nobody inspects deer. Texas has an enormous wild deer population, and a feral hog population on top of it, and both move freely across county lines and property boundaries without anyone looking at their wounds. The hill country in particular, where one of those confirmed cases turned up, is some of the densest deer country in the United States. When the fly was last here, wildlife carried it as readily as cattle did, and there is no reason to think it would behave differently now. That is why the state's wildlife department sits on the response team alongside the Animal Health Commission. Not because deer are the priority, but because a screwworm population living quietly in wildlife is one that cannot be found by looking at herds. So the honest position at the end of all this is not a prediction, and anyone offering you one is guessing. What is true is this: an animal that this country spent 15 years and an extraordinary national effort removing, that was sealed out for 6 decades by a wall of sterile flies over a Panamanian jungle, has crossed the border and is now confirmed in 2 American states. The tools to beat it exist and have been proven. The capacity to deploy those tools at the necessary scale is being built at speed, and is not yet where it needs to be. And the thing standing between an outbreak and an epidemic, right now in the summer of 2026, is a very large number of individual people looking very carefully at very small wounds. Which brings it back to that ranch in Zavala County. A 3-week-old calf, alive and standing, with a navel that had not quite finished healing. Somebody looked at it closely enough to know something was wrong, and cared enough to send it off. And a laboratory 1,100 miles away in Iowa confirmed the return of an insect that a generation of Americans spent half their careers removing from this continent. Edward Knipling's idea sat in a drawer for years because one man did not pass a letter along. It got out eventually, and it cleared an entire country. And it has been quietly holding a line in a jungle ever since. The line has been crossed. The idea still works. Whether the country can build enough flies fast enough to use it again is the part nobody can answer yet. If a story like this stays with you after the screen goes dark, YouTube has already put the next one up. It is waiting.